Perfect. So I'm Rebecca Daynard. I'm the executive director here at reThink Green, and just going to go over a few things about the debate and the event, and then we'll have a chance to hear from our first candidate, Mark Surrey. So reThink Green would like to acknowledge that the Sudbury and the Nickel Belt ridings are on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous people from the beginning. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all of the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Aboriginal people who have been stewards of this place. In particular, we would like to acknowledge the Robertson Huron Treaty Territory, and the land which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Digmashing and Anishinaabe Nation. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historical connection to this place. We also would like to recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made in both shaping and strengthening this community, in particular our province and the country as a whole. Next slide. So this event is one of 100 debates on the environment organized by an organization called GreenPAC. They have a simple mission, is to make the environment an issue that no party and no candidate can ignore by organizing 100 nonpartisan all-candidate debates on the environment in ridings across Canada. And as you can see from the map, similar events are happening to this one right across the country, both today and there were some yesterday as well. So we are in good company hearing from candidates about this very important issue leading up to the election. Next slide. So a little bit about the organizations that have put this event together. reThink Green, which I'm the executive director. We bring together ideas, partners, and resources to build sustainable communities in Northeastern Ontario and beyond. The other organization that has been instrumental in getting this off the ground is the Citizens Climate Lobby Canada. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan, grassroots advocacy organization funded solely by Canadians with a twin focus to create the political will for a livable planet and to empower people to claim their political and personal power. So as you can see there, this idea of talking about the environment and making it an important issue in an election is really core to the mandate of both of our organizations, which is why we're so excited to hear from the candidates today and have them express their views on this really important issue at this time. Next. So just a little housekeeping about how we're going to make this happen. So all the viewers are going to be on mute with their cameras off for the duration of the event. We've got quite a few people on the line and it just gets too distracting and confusing for both the moderator and the candidates to be seeing cameras and microphones going off here and there. The event host will be reachable by chat, so if you've got any technical problems or concerns, you can post them there. Also, if you have any burning questions you can't sit on, you can put them in the chat and we can pass them along to the candidates for them to respond to at their leisure offline. Each candidate will have a total of about 25 minutes to answer questions and share some thoughts on environmental topics. There's actually 4 questions about federal policy and bills that have been voted on and passed through the Parliament. And we also have some audience questions that were solicited through our social media channels to get some input from citizens to hear about what their particular concerns are. So that's how this is all going to work. I think I'm next going to introduce our moderator this evening. This is Dr. Evan Hoffman. He's a trainer, facilitator, mediator, and consultant. Evan teaches regularly at university and college level courses on corporate social responsibility, Indigenous negotiations, peace building, and conflict resolution for a number of Canadian universities in Canada and the US, including right here at Nipissing University in North Bay. So over the last 20 years, he's provided consulting, education, and training services for Global Affairs Canada, the UN, the EU, the Jimmy Carter Center in Atlanta, and many others. His most recent research is examining different ideologies and worldviews related to water use in the Cookman Basin in BC. So I'm going to turn it over to Evan now, and he's going to work with our candidates through some prepared questions and then some audience questions.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for getting this session started so nicely and for the warm welcome. And thank you to everyone who's here joining us this evening on this Thursday evening. So we're going to start out by asking Mark Sire, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, please correct me, to start out the session by taking 1 or 2 minutes, maybe just to introduce yourself to our audience this evening, and then we'll delve into the set of questions that Rebecca mentioned a bit earlier.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, just the French serré, the accent aigu, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. Hi, everyone. Bonjour, Annie. Obviously, I want to thank reThink Greening, Citizens Climate Lobby, the Coalition for Livable Sudbury, and obviously GreenPAC for organizing again this event. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Tigmishing Anishinaabe First Nations with the Wanapete First Nations and Tigmishing and Métis people, as acknowledged earlier. Obviously, I'm looking forward to tonight, but also, you know, many of you are no strangers in the room here. We've had regular meetings, you know, attended rallies, you know, we've contacted my office, and obviously want to continue the climate emergency debate and look at specific solutions and specific legislation. So looking forward to the questions tonight. Obviously, as an MP, you know, working closely with municipal government and mayors, Greater Sudbury and West Nipissing that both declared a climate emergency was really important to do. So obviously, as an outdoor with my wife, with the kayaking and fishing and the outdoors, like many of you that are here tonight, it's really important that we continue and not just continue, but obviously enhance and build upon what we've already started. So I'm looking forward to the ideas tonight. You know, again, I want to thank you for the last 6 years for bringing your concerns and being your voice in Ottawa to make sure that we together make a difference. So I'm looking forward to the questions. I'm you know, open to kind of the format is a bit different here, but that's okay. That's good. So Evan, I'm not sure if there's anything else. I wanted to be brief so we could dive into the questions.
Yeah, well, thanks for those opening remarks and getting us started this evening. So all set of questions are going to pertain to different particular bills and policies. So we're going to start out by looking at C12, which is the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. And we know that this bill requires setting national targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada with the objective of attaining net zero emissions by the year 2050. And we know that the targets are to be set by the Minister of the Environment for their 2030, 2035, 2040, and 2045. So this bill is passed and is now the law of the land. And we have 3 kind of specific questions that we're going to dig a little bit deeper into this bill. So if you want to just go ahead to advance the next slide, please. The questions we'd like you to address, Mark, are 1, to defend how your party voted on this bill, C12, how you voted, and how you could have made the policy better if you could.
Thank you, Evan. Obviously, C12 is a cornerstone of the Liberal plan that we put forward. I'll go briefly here to the questions and I'll dive into more of the specifics. Obviously, I voted in favor, not only voted in favor, but been active with the Environment Committee. I've been active with Minister Wilkinson and active with some of you on the call here to bring some of that feedback back to the bill to enhance the bill. So from a policy perspective, what I want to do also to look at this is I mean, if you look at specifically, I'm going to be looking at you know, the UK, what's been passed in the UK. Obviously, the UK is a bit different in Canada because all parties are fully committed. So it's a non-partisan issue. In Canada, we still have you know, some challenges with one party, but these are one of the things. So I just want to be clear here from 2015 to 19, we've put $60 billion towards climate action and clean growth. And in the fall, we added a $53 billion commitment to Canada's green recovery. So that's over $100 billion. So some of the, we have to tax the ultra rich in order to fund climate initiatives. No, Canada's a rich country. We have the purchasing power, we have the budget, and we've already committed $100 billion to look and put in place. Obviously, making the pollution is not. So that's when we're looking at targets, and it's really important. Part of that, which is a comprehensive, price on pollution. We fought to the provinces. We fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. I want to thank the CLC, the petition that was submitted in Parliament with about 1,200 signatures to make sure we continue the price on pollution, which is very important. But when we look at the landmarks on the accountability legislation that was brought forward, this is really important that we look at moving this forward. Additional to that, as Parliamentary Secretary of Natural Resources, we've added some other initiatives with an hydrogen strategy, clean fuel, a net zero accelerator fund. And just to give you some very close to home example, Sault Ste. Marie, there was 200 out of that fund with Algoma Steel, Martinez, $200 million. I couldn't believe how inefficient and pollutant that steel plant was. But now our government's investments in there. Also, when we look at clean tech, Canada is a world leader in clean tech. We're the second largest number of clean tech companies in the world, just behind the US. So when we look at some of these initiatives on clean tech, it's really continuous. So we have a broad range of initiatives that are part of not only C12, but also other initiatives that we put in place. And I'll just mention, we may not have a lot of time tonight, but we have, the harmful single-use plastic ban. We have protecting 30% of the oceans and land. We have the planting of 2 billion trees. We have to plant them, so that's part of the process that we're looking at moving forward. So these are some of the initiatives to get to a net zero by 2050. But also one of these elements that we look at with C12 is so critical that we put this in place. So C12, and I know I want to ask Evan how much time I have, but I'll just give you a few elements here when we say listen to the experts. You have here Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the Green Party of British Columbia, and I'll quote what he said about our plan. As a client, and I quote, as a climate scientist and someone with a background in climate policy, I've been impressed by the leadership of the government here on the environment. The climate plan he recently developed, which Minister Wilkinson introduced, is bold and thoughtful. It is the only credible plan to put forward by any party at the federal level. And this is a critical time. I mean, I have a list of other experts that have, and I welcome you to, I won't read them all tonight, but obviously, but there is a long list of that we have put a comprehensive plan in place, and C12 is very important. Yes, the minister looking at looking at the accountability measures in there, and there's been some discussion about should that be changed. So that's kind of the element of a political party, the process. Like I said earlier, we're not there yet with all the political parties. So these are important steps to take. So for me, this is now the law of the land. How can we put some, sooner targets in 2025 and then 2030? That was mentioned to me earlier. So there's a lot of elements that play into that. So maybe the last, there's a few other points, but the kind of a clean energy grid is really, really important, because right now Canada's electrification grid is 80% emission free. It's still one of the cleanest in the world, but there's more work to be done to make sure that we get up to 90+% of non-emission by 2030. So there's quite a few elements here that is part of the plan itself. And also, let's be clear, environmentalists for decades I've been calling on the federal government to take action. And not only have we done the C12, but we've also invested heavily and permanently in public transit. And that's something that's been asked for in a big way by environmentalists all across the country. And I have a list here of projects that have been funding in the billions of dollars to municipalities for public transit and parks and bike trails. So that's another element. And I'm all saying this because, there's not one set of, we have to look at a comprehensive from electrifying your grid, making sure that all electric cars are electric by 2030. So there's a lot of different elements that come into a plan that we've put in place. So I'll leave it at that to see if there's further questions specifically on that. But from a C12 perspective, it took a while to get past the House, and I want to, it's been challenging in a minority government to get legislation. There's been a lot of, there's been boycotting, there's been filibustering of different plans or different legislations, and I could list a whole slew, but here we're talking about C12, and want to commit getting the feedback and bringing it back to the minister as we look at implementing the bill in the 44th Parliament.
Well, thank you, Mark, for such a thorough and detailed response to C12. The format is that we're going to look at another couple of policies and then some audience questions, and so we would like to get through all of that material if possible. So we're going to have to stay on time and be fair to everybody. We'll have to keep the replies to about 2 minutes per question, if you don't mind. So, like I said, shifting gears here then to the next policy, looking at C15. This is about enshrining the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People under national law. And there's a statement there from UNDRIP that states Indigenous peoples have the right to the conservation and protection of the environment and the productive capacity of their lands or territories and resources. So that bill is passed. That is now the law of the land. And we have the same 3 questions about the last policy applying to this policy, basically looking at how you voted and how you could perhaps make the policy better, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Obviously, the United Declaration of Indigenous Rights is probably 15 years that should have been implemented long time ago. I'm part of the Indigenous Caucus. We work directly with the minister and Minister of Justice also to ensure that this was a government bill in this Parliament. And the reason I'm saying the government bill, because the last bill was a private member's bill, and private members' bills don't get priority in Parliament as a government bill. And as I want to thank the Fridays for students for several of the rallies urging us to get this bill passed. We all know that in the last Parliament, the Conservative Senate quashed this bill, which was horrendous to be doing. So now this is the law of the land, as you indicated, and now we're looking at how do we incorporate this to the reconciliation, and then clearly from a natural resources perspective, environment, and building larger projects. I hear it all the time now. Indigenous communities, First Nations communities are invited to the table at the beginning of a project, not at the end. And Natural Resources Canada, for example, has a whole department of Indigenous staff, experts that work with the proponents to make sure that the proponents from any project that they started to submit applications to the federal government, that Indigenous communities are consulted, engaged in a partnership right at the beginning. So this is crucial, and obviously, we see a lot of support here, and we need to make sure, and this is part of not only reconciliation, but also part of self-government for First Nations. We need to make sure that they have the financial resources moving forward for independence and self-government. Did I keep it at 2 minutes there, Evan?
Yeah, yes, you did. Thank you so much. Okay, well, let's go ahead then and shift our focus to C230, which is the next policy that we'll be talking about a little bit. I want to advance the next slide there. There we go. So C230, the National Strategy to Redress Environmental Racism Act, says that environmental racism describes the disproportionate toxic exposure and harms experienced by racialized communities that result from government and corporate decisions on where to place polluting industrial facilities, refineries, mines, landfills, incinerators, among others. So this private member's bill would develop a national strategy to redress the harm caused by environmental racism. It has passed the second reading, but has not become the law. So just like the other two previous policies, if we advance to the next slide, we've got a couple questions for you there about how you could make the policy better and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. And I had the opportunity to talk to my colleague, Leonore, in Cumberland, Colchester. Obviously, this bill, as a private member's bill, and this parliament will have to be reintroduced in the next one. I did vote in favor of C230, because it really addresses the systematic inequalities. When we look at increasing awareness of different aspects of racism, including environmental dimension, that's something that's not necessarily in place. So this is something that we looked at. I talked to the minister over C12 if there's an opportunity to kind of incorporate committee work. So here, obviously, the bill here, there's really three sets of issues that the government is looking at discussing, studying, and considering the amendments. So we're looking at adding environmental justice to the bill. Environmental justice has been defined by fair treatment, meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, and income. Also modifying or removing measures that will impact federal provincial relations, because that's the challenge that we have sometimes here in Canada. But some measures proposed in the bills are appropriately taken by some of the provinces. So that's why, there is that kind of recognition of jurisdiction, and the protection of environment is shared by both levels of government. So collaboration on this, the province is really key. And obviously the last point is providing flexibility and development of the strategy. So obviously the bill here, everyone deserves a voice for greener tomorrow, and this bill, I've talked to Leona, and obviously reintroducing it as a private member's bill, but also I have tried and I will continue and hopefully in the 44th Parliament to see if this could be part of a government bill also.
Thank you. So for our fourth question, we do shift the focus a little bit to your climate policy, and I think for the sake of time, instead of like going through each question in a strict order, why don't I just kind of make an executive decision here and kind of change it up a little bit and just say, maybe you could use the time on this point to just, are there any main features that you really want to highlight for the audience here this evening? What are some of the main features of your climate policy?
Well, I started to address some of them earlier. I just want to make sure that, and your question that you had earlier in the emails for tonight, what kind of bills would you support to prioritize the climate lobby, and obviously hearing from the students, hearing from the groups that are here tonight. And C12 is how can we enhance, obviously clear targets. The 5 years is something, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's important to dive in a bit more on that aspect of it. And also if there's elements, as I said, like the UK plan and Parliament, to see how can we make it a bit more accountable. So for me, enhancing, the carbon pricing is very, very important. We got to continue with the plan that's in place, which is it's been recognized as one of the best in the world. More comprehensive on that. And I want to make sure that maybe the last point on this is in January 2021, I held a circular economy session and want to continue. I know the reThink Green has been actively involved in circular economy. And I think it's really important that we look at the mining, the forestry, the health. And I know when we look at health-related anesthetic gas use of Canada, I've had the opportunity to, have briefings on this, and anesthesia and greenhouse gas emissions are so important. There's a big component in the health sector that we're not talking about when we're looking at the environment and we're looking at net zero emissions to 2050. So I would like to make sure, and I guess to your point, Evan, to the audience, we need to work more closely on the health side, because it's a climate emergency. It is the environment, but there's a huge health cost that we're not talking about. And that's something I'd like. I know health hospitals is a provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government could play a role there as we move forward. So I just wanted to mention that aspect, to be able to bring that feedback, and to see how can I bring that. I've heard clearly, even on the environment side, childcare is so important, because if you get more women to work, more women in the workplace, you will see a difference on the environment. Women are leading and on the environmental side. So a childcare policy is crucial in this element. And I've heard it as chair of the Parliamericas, Latin American countries. I've had the opportunity to look at the gender lens, Status of Women Committee, and I know, and we have the youth, the leadership, and that equality, and having more women in the workforce because of childcare in place is going to be better for the environment. So I just wanted to make sure that that's there as one of the policies. So hopefully I fit into that 2 minutes there, Evan.
Yes, wonderful. Thanks. So we have 2 minutes for the next two ones as well. And so this is where we shift gears, and these are audience questions that have been submitted, as Rebecca mentioned, through the social media platforms earlier. So the first question then refers to Wolf Lake old growth red pine forest and how it's under threat from mining exploration. And it also links in the idea of the Laurentian University green space and how that's one of the most important community green spaces in Sudbury and essential to the watershed, the lake, and drinking water health, but it's at risk from the insolvency at LU. So the specific question then related to those two topics is, will you commit to protecting these green spaces? And then if so, what actions will you take to do so? So 2 minutes on that one. Then we have another audience question of 2 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Evan. Obviously, too important. The Wolf Lake, we've had conversations in the past, and there's the environmental logging and a lot of the environmental that's being put in place right now is provincial. But what the federal government has a role is to protecting, and when we're looking at parks, when we're looking at lands, we do have, we're ahead, and I don't have the exact number of where we're at for protecting lands, but I'm committing to seeing how can we incorporate Wolf Lake into that protection from a federal perspective. It has not been done, but most of that has been more on the provincial regulatory side of things. So I'm being upfront. The only thing that we would have federally, but it's something that I haven't been actively involved in the past. Obviously, the greening space in Laurentian, I mean, like many of you that are on the call here tonight, I've biked, I've walked, I've hiked the Laurentian trails, and there's no, the insolvency crisis that Laurentian has thrust out upon the community is unacceptable. And we could look at the issue of federal and provincial jurisdictions, but at this case, I've already worked with call the mayor, call councillors. If there's anything that we could do to try and get the lands to the city would be one way, because then the federal government could then provide some support to the city. Laurentian University cannot sell this. We have to find ways to make these protected lands. This is unacceptable that this is even being considered. So I have actively been asking Environment in Ottawa if there are any provisions that we have. So far, I have not been successful. It is in court, and which is usually challenging, but I commit to continuing to see what we could do. But we have the only right now path that I'm seeing forward is how can we get the city of Sudbury or another organization to see how can they apply for funding, because from a federal perspective with the provinces is the lead on this, and we cannot go without the province's consent on this. But if there's a way to bypass this with the city, then looking forward to trying to see what we could do. But it's very traumatic for the community, and I talked to residents, and it is challenging. So, thank you.
All right. Well, we have one final audience question for you, and that's looking at basically small businesses, the local economy, and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you don't mind just sharing maybe like 2 or 3 points with us on what are some practical things perhaps that you could do to help business thrive in the post-pandemic economic recovery period that we're entering here, and doing so in a way that's respectful of the low carbon economy.
Yeah, well, our government has already put quite a few measures. Obviously, 80% of the funding for COVID-related pandemic in Ontario has been with the federal government. So we provided support to schools, looking at quality of air in the schools, nursing homes. Also made announcements, St. Joseph's and St. Gabriel on the nursing home side. There's also a retrofit program that we've launched to help home users, and so it's not necessarily on the business side, but the home users. So there's a number of initiatives there. Obviously, the wage subsidy and the rent has been there for businesses, but also some of the clean tech. And I didn't get a chance to list all of the clean tech and some of the funds that we have. So I encourage to contact my office. But we are looking at part of the infrastructure. And one of the things I'm committing, and I have committed, is to ensure that any infrastructure dollars that are spent, that we make sure that there is provisions to make sure that the building has net zero, and how can we finance that to support. And I'll give you the example. Just recently, Coniston, a seniors home with 55 units, we added additional dollars to make sure that the building is net zero and energy efficiency. So there is that element. We've also provided dollars to the municipality to get some of their buildings net zero. I strongly believe that the federal government should play a bigger role with local municipalities in many ways. And this would be a good example, because we all know the train wreck that the Ford government has provided here on their environmental policies, and we have to find ways to support local organizations, local businesses better.
Right on time there, Mark. Thanks so much. So just as a closing, couple of closing words, I'll just say thank you for participating this evening, and thank you for respecting the time limits. And you are, of course, more than welcome to stay on the session for the remainder of it as we hear from the other candidates. So thank you for participating. And I believe our next session was a pre-recorded, is that correct? We've got yes. Craig coming up next.
That's correct. So we're just switching over to, unfortunately, Craig was called into work this evening. So he was able to join us this afternoon for a pre-recorded session to answer his questions. Unfortunately, the schedule didn't work out for Evan to be there. So it's me asking the questions on the video. So slightly different style, but still the same questions. And here's our green.
So our next candidate is Craig Gravel, running for the Green Party of Canada in the riding of Nickel Belt. Welcome, Craig, and please take a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to some questions.
Thank you for having me. My name is Craig Gravel. I am the Green Party of Canada candidate running in Nickel Belt. I'm 24 years old. I'm a recent college graduate. I've been working in kitchens now for about 6 years. And the reason why I decided to run as a candidate for the Green Party of Canada is to run on progressive policies, as well as policies that will address and solve many of the problems that we are facing, especially when it comes to the climate crisis and other issues as well.
Great, thank you. Next slide. So we're going to ask you about some of those policies. The first policy question is about Bill C-12, which is the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. This bill requires the setting of national carbon reduction targets in Canada with the objective of obtaining net zero emissions by 2050. The targets are to be set by the Ministry of the Environment in 2030, 2035, 2040, and 2045. This bill is passed and is now the law. Next slide. How would you defend how your party voted on this bill? How would you have voted? And how would you have made this policy better if you could?
Sure, and thank you for the question. So the Green Party of Canada MPs supported the C12 or Bill C12 Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. I believe, and the Green Party of Canada also believes, that we must have a consistent set of national targets to have the accountability needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Canada while aiming to be net negative in 2050. Without accountability, we won't see serious reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The Green Party of Canada, if elected, would accelerate our efforts to reduce emissions by 60% from 2005 levels by 2030, and would enforce targets and timelines starting in 2023.
Great.
So yeah, the things that I would change, I would like to see targets and timelines be enforced a lot earlier. That's why I agree with the Green Party platform calling for enforcing targets and timelines starting in 2023. After a few changes that were made to the bill throughout its multiple readings, I would have voted yes alongside other Green MPs on this bill as well.
Great, thank you. Next slide. The next policy is C15, enshrining the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People under national law. So the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People states that Indigenous people have the right to conserve and protect the environment and the productive capacity of their lands or territories and resources. This bill has now passed and is the law. Next slide. So once again, how would you defend how your party voted? How would you have voted? And how might you have made this policy better?
Sure, and thank you for this question as well. The government of Canada must take all measures necessary to ensure that the laws of Canada are consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, and must prepare, 2 out of 3 Green Party of Canada MPs voted yes to the third reading of Bill C15. It's hard for me to defend how each MP voted themselves, as 1 voted no and 2 voted yes on the third reading, which in a sense tells me that there isn't a consensus among Greens about Bill C15. The one member that voted is no longer a member of the Green Party of Canada. I want to add. I would have voted yes to C15, as I would have liked to see UNDRIP enshrined into law. I am a little cautious, however, especially given the track record of the Liberal government when it comes to addressing the needs of Indigenous peoples in any meaningful way. I'd prefer to see an NDP or Green government proposing bills and policies that will actually look to solve a lot of issues that Indigenous communities face in a true, meaningful way. Nevertheless, I think it is a small step in the right direction, and it's important to pressure the government, whichever government that holds power that is, to do right by Indigenous peoples. So we need to do way more than enshrining UNDRIP under national law. Justice is essential. And as settlers, we must foster a relationship with Indigenous peoples that comes from good faith and respects treaties.
Excellent. Next slide. Okay, the final policy question. Bill C-230, which is a National Risk Strategy to Redress Environmental Racism Act. Environmental racism describes the disproportionate toxic exposure and harms experienced by racialized communities that result from government and corporate decisions on where to place polluting industrial facilities, refineries, mines, landfills, incinerators, among others. This was a private member's bill that would develop a national strategy to redress the harms caused by environmental racism. It did pass second readings, but has not become law. Again, how would you defend your party's stance on this, and what would you do to improve it? Next slide.
Sorry, I can answer the question.
Yes, so it's
Okay.
the same question. How would you defend your party's?
Okay.
Yeah.
So Green Party of Canada MPs supported the C-230 private members bill. Marginalized communities have dealt with and continue to deal with the impacts of environmental racism that negatively affect health and environmental outcomes in those communities. There is a higher proportion of industry and landfills, particularly around Indigenous communities and other marginalized communities, which negatively affect the land used for agriculture, the water sources needed for drinking water, not only from humans, but all other species, and the air quality that people have to breathe into their lungs. After reading the bill, I agree with the consultation process and the contents within the bill, and I also would have voted yes alongside other Green MPs.
Okay, excellent. Next slide. This is about a policy that you might create. So what climate policy would you either continue to champion or improve or create? What would the impact of this policy be? Which experts and what evidence support it? And will it encourage our global neighbors to cut emissions too?
Sure. So I kind of want to answer that question in I guess two ways. The climate bill that I would continue to champion is actually Bill C-232 by Leah Gazan. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. I'm sorry if that's not how you pronounce the name. The bill's purpose was to require the federal government to respect its commitment under the Convention of Climate Change to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while also complying with UNDRIP. It's the accountability in the bill that enforces upon the federal government to reach these targets as well as complying with UNDRIP that has me very interested in the bill and has me wanting to continue to champion the bill. Because without accountability, we won't reach any targets we set. And going on to the second part of the answer that I was mentioning before, I also believe that we won't really reach any of the targets we set if we don't provide a just transition for all Canadian workers, no matter if you're in an oil and gas industry to any green industry. And a policy that I believe would actually do really well when it comes to combating climate change and the climate crisis is a guaranteed livable income. The climate crisis is a crisis that will take decades to solve, and it'll take decades to work towards fixing the problem and having net zero emissions by 2050. And in order to do that, we need to allow everyone to have the mindset to have a long-term mindset, I guess. And it's kind of hard for everyone to have a long-term mindset when everyone's focused on paying the bills that they need to pay this month. So a guaranteed livable income will free up everyone's mental capacities to dream for a lot more and dream bigger, to look towards the future and to hopefully make better decisions that will address the climate crisis in a real way, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to next slide, where we have a couple of questions that we have gathered from our audience that have been submitted on social media. So this one is about green space. The globally significant Wolf Lake old growth red pine forest is under threat from mining exploration. And the Laurentian University green space is one of the most important community green spaces in Sudbury and essential to the watershed, lake, and drinking water health. It is at risk from the LU insolvency. Will you commit to protecting these green spaces, and what actions will you take to do so?
So if I was elected, I will commit to protecting these green spaces. Yeah, I wasn't aware that the Laurentian University insolvency was actually putting this green space at risk. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to one, work towards solving the Laurentian U insolvency. I don't know if that will actually work towards protecting the Wolf Lake old growth red pine forests, but even if it's not, even if the solution doesn't come through fixing Laurentian University's insolvency, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, be it through passing a bill or supporting other members' bills in the House of Commons who also take it seriously in protecting not only Wolf Lake old growth red pine forest, but forests across the country.
Great, thanks. Okay, and next, this is our final question from the audience. Small businesses are still suffering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. What would you do to help small businesses thrive in the low carbon economy?
So small businesses are still suffering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously at the outset of the pandemic, we had a lot of businesses that needed to close down to stop the spread. And unfortunately, when that happens, you're gonna have businesses that aren't going to see the revenue required to either pay the bills or to see any the profits that they saw before the pandemic. So a big part of my campaign is actually the guaranteed livable income. It's great for people. It's great for businesses. There's nothing better for businesses than customers with disposable income, and by providing every Canadian with disposable income through a guaranteed livable income program, it gives Canadians more spending power to purchase in their local communities. And when they purchase in their local communities, those businesses will have to hire more workers. And when businesses hire more workers, we can grow the economy through labor and through the circulation of money that a guaranteed livable income will provide towns and small businesses, sorry.
Great, thank you very much. That's all of our questions. Yeah, I guess we do have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if you wanted to add anything. I don't know what we'll do in the real life debate if this happens, but I just don't want to give you less time if you want any more time. But I feel like you've addressed the questions very well, so if you're good to go. Good to go.
No, I just wanted to thank you guys for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you guys and have my message shared with everyone who's watching. The Green Party of Canada is one of two parties in Nickel Belt who are taking the climate crisis seriously, or at least more seriously than the two parties that have held power in this country ever since its inception. And it's important to understand that if we want to address the climate crisis and climate change seriously, then we got to pledge our votes to political parties who are willing to take serious action in getting it done.
Perfect. Thank you very much for coming today, and wish you all the best in your campaign. And thanks for participating in this event.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Okay, so that concludes our pre-recorded session, and we will bring up the PowerPoint to go back to our live session. And while we're doing that, we will do a quick audio check with Andriane Chenier. Are you with us this evening? Okay, there you are.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. So
Excellent.
I'm glad you're here early, because I think we originally had you scheduled at 8:05, but it looks like we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so that's fine. Okay, so we have our PowerPoint up. We can hear you perfectly clear. So as per everyone else, I'll just ask you to take a minute or two, please, to just introduce yourself.
Bonjour, Annie. Hello. I'm Andriane Chenier, the NDP candidate for Nickel Belt. I want to start by saying thank you to reThink Green, the Citizens Climate Lobby of Greater Sudbury, and GreenPAC for the important work that you do. It feels like the world is on fire, and I think we need to act right now. And I also want to start by acknowledging the Robinson-Huron Treaty and the traditional territories of the Atikameksheng, Anishinaabeg, and the Wanapitei First Nations. I am committed to truth and reconciliation. Our party is devoted to ensuring that Canada can move forward into a future that sees the environment and our communities working together. Jack Layton was a pioneer in the climate action. Under his leadership, we brought in the Climate Change Accountability Act in 2007. Had it been adopted then, we would have already enshrined into law with science-based targets of reducing greenhouse gases to 80% below the 1990 levels by 2050. We're already seeing the effects of uncontrolled emissions. There's climate emergencies everywhere. We're seeing flooding, tornadoes, and heat domes, and we can't afford to have Canada continue to contribute to these tragedies that displace people, that create humanitarian problems across the globe. So I want to ensure that climate action is kept at the forefront of any bill that gets considered. Putting an environmental lens on budgets, infrastructure projects, or any other federal endeavor will help to ensure that we're always moving forward on our targets and will remove silos that might exist. This is not a single ministry problem. It's a pervasive problem that requires the full engagement of government.
Thank you, Andriane. And I believe you were on the earlier session, so we're going to follow the similar format that we've been following, where we've got 3 questions pertaining to specific policies. Pardon me. So the first one is C12, and then we've got a slide about your policy, then a couple of audience questions. So as mentioned earlier, we know that C12 is about Canadian Net Zero's Emission Accountability Act. And if we go to the next slide, there are 3 questions that are asking you to kind of drill down a little bit deeper into this policy. So 1, defend how your party voted on this bill. Secondly, how you would have voted. And then thirdly, how you could possibly have made this policy better if you could.
Okay. It's not a secret that New Democrats are committed to climate action. As I've stated already, our targets would have already been in law in 2007. When it comes to how our party voted on this bill, well, our party voted, first off, what we did was to start by working with the sitting government to make sure that that there were necessary improvements that were made into this bill, because one of the things that we absolutely must have is accountability measures. We can't just say that we're going to put something in that's going to be set, in 2050 and not check in on a regular basis to ensure that we are in fact still on track. Because if we wait until 2050, we already know that would be way too late. How our party then voted, we voted in favor of, after our improvements strengthened the bill, we then supported that so that it could become into law. How would I have made this policy better? I think that for me, it's really about ensuring that we have very concrete, very discrete accountability targets, but also that we're always continuously consulting, not just with the government, but also without government to make sure that we're always responsive to the needs and to the impacts of the things that we're doing. And so that would be how I would have been, how I would be ensuring that the bill would be better. And when I go to government, that is going to be, I'll be working to ensure that we're not ignoring, that we're actually consistently on track.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to ask the same 3 questions then about C15. And so we can advance to the next slide. So we know that C15 is about enshrining the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People under national law. And we have the same 3 questions pertaining to Bill C15.
Okay. Absolutely, we support truth and reconciliation. I mean, Bill C15 is the second version of this particular this bill. The first one was brought in by the NDP MP Romeo Saganash, and so we're happy. We're so happy that it was finally put into law. We are in fact committed to meaningful truth and reconciliation, and what that means is that we don't necessarily want just a declaration. What we want is to actually see it implemented. And in order for things to be implemented, what we have to see is meaningful budgets, not just promised dollars. Because in previous governments, there were lots of promised dollars, but not many of them were actually spent to do the work of that is necessary to ensure that the rights of our Indigenous sisters, brothers, or Two-Spirited are in fact considered, and that we are working meaningfully towards it. So, and this collaboration between from nation to nation is so critical to our ability to move forward on climate action, because Indigenous peoples have been stewards of this land for so long, and they have valuable historical and traditional knowledge that is passed down that can be leveraged, and they can then be put into action for meaningful climate action. How would I have made this policy better? Ensuring that when we were really meaningfully putting steps, and that again, same thing, when we're implementing, when we're putting dollars forward, that we're actually checking in with the nations that we want, nation to nation, so that we're ensuring that we're not creating more harm than good.
Thank you, Andrian. We'll go to the next slide, please. So the next set of questions then are drilling down a little bit around C230, which is the National Strategy to Redress Environmental Racism Act. And if we go ahead and jump to the next slide, we'll see that we have those 3 questions where we dig into this policy a bit.
Okay, well, New Democrats voted in favor of this bill. I would have voted in favor of this bill as well. And the same goes for C12. I'm not sure if I said that, but I would have definitely voted in favor. I think for me, when I look at this, what this particular bill means, it means that we are working with Indigenous communities. Because that's critical to success. We already know that climate emergencies, they target, or they not necessarily that they target, they impact people differently depending on where they are, and depending also on their socioeconomic station in life. I mean, we're just looking at traveling heat domes out in BC that caused a record number of deaths, and more specifically, looking at people who didn't have access to air conditioning. So, I mean, just in the Nickel Belt, that's a lot of our say, for example, there's a lot of seniors who don't have who don't have air conditioning, and that makes them much more vulnerable to the impacts of very high heat. There's also a lot of other vulnerable populations that just that particular piece would impact. Then there's the droughts that impacted our agricultural sector, and the number of people that were displaced by the forest fires. Like we can't just wait and not act. I mean, just the fact that they were happening elsewhere in the province that weren't necessarily in my community where I was, doesn't mean that we were untouched by it. I have a small farm at my house, and the smoke from the forest fires that was traveling down from the north actually impacted all of the animals that I had on them. And that was not like, it's not like while it may seem far in terms of kilometers, it is not that far. We're really clear. We're really close. So from my perspective, I think that we need to continue to move forward, and we need to have to make sure that when we're addressing critical climate issues, that we need to still have that nation to nation discussion, but also consultation with different groups that are they're predisposed, not predisposed, wrong word, that are more affected by climate crisis across the world. So how would I have improved it? Well, just a little tiny snippet about me is that I'm a scientist by training. And so I believe in the value, not just of consultation, but of quantification and validation. So we can't just say that we're going to have these great ideas. Ideas are great because they give us a focus, they give us a target to go forward. But we also need to make sure that when we have programs that we're implementing them, that we're actually checking in to make sure that those programs are working. And that goes through to the consultation, quantitation, and validation, that we're constantly checking in, that we're constantly making sure that we are not, in our zeal to reopen the economy, say, for example, destroying valuable ecosystems that may be on indigenous lands, just because they're commercially attractive. We can't continue to do that. And so we have to ensure that whatever it is that we're putting forward, that when we're considering environmental action or commercialization or development and or whatever, that we're also making sure that we're not creating impacts on populations that were not in the decision-making process. So that's how I would have improved it.
Thank you so much. Let's go ahead to the next question here, digs in on your particular climate policies. And so we've got a set of 4 kind of points here to address. What climate policy would you continue to champion, improve, or create? What would be the impact of this policy? Which experts and what evidence supports it? And then fourthly, will it encourage our global neighbors to cut their emissions too?
Okay. That's a great question. So one of the first things that I think is critical is that we need to stop this practice of just like subsidizing fossil fuels. So like we need to stop that. I mean, it's right now, it's $18 billion of tax dollars that we have that are being given to organizations or corporations that are just generating greenhouse gases or fossil fuels for us to burn, which contributes to the overall greenhouse gas burden. So first off, I think we need to stop that, like stop it and take those $18 billion and invest it into green technologies and environmental protection. And by using those dollars, what we'd be doing is that we would stop this practice of just setting these fossil fuels on fire. And overall, that would reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by about, like, if I remember correctly, about 40 megatons. So that's an important piece, because when we move away from using this kind of energy source, if we stop giving it, if we stop incentivizing it, if we stop giving it funds with which to operate, then we're saying basically you need to work on your own. And at the same time, we could be using these $18 billion to do cleanup of other, say, for example, I think in Alberta, there's like $1 billion worth of orphan wells that have just been left behind by these by exploration activities, and they've just been abandoned. Now it's on us. We can stop that from happening, and we can instead reinvest those dollars into other greener economies. Because I mean, one of like not greenhouse, good God, I'm having difficulty tonight. My apologies. It's been a long day. So we know that the green sector is one of the fastest growing sectors in Canada, and in Canada, we're leaders. So that kind of ties into another one of my priorities, which really moves to looking at greener sources of electricity. So we can't be looking at burning coal anymore. We can't be looking at fossil fuels. We need to be looking at different ways of powering our lives, and we all know that we do need that power. So that's fine. but moving away from removing the subsidies and basically investing in greener technologies such as electrification means that like there's a whole possibility that now opens up in terms of we can reimagine what transportation looks like. We could be energizing our homes in green ways so that we're not contributing overall to the burden. We could be making sure that businesses and larger industries are in fact moving towards using these greener sources of powers, which overall means that we would be removing like greenhouse gases from the air. We'd be improving our air quality. My animals would be happier. And that overall would be reducing, like just moving away from setting fossil fuels on fire for the purposes of moving things forward. That would help us like drop it by about 250 megatons. And we know that this is possible. We're already seeing electric vehicles on the streets. We're already seeing, industries. I think mining is doing a lot of work, in fact, to electrify itself instead of moving to gas, which is also a bonus for the workers who are not no longer being exposed to those kinds of emissions, because we also know that just setting greenhouse gases on fire causes some kinds of cancers. And another one, which is a bit closer to my heart, because I am we have a small farm in where I live, and what we're trying to do is incorporate green techniques into our farming. So what we do is our animals live in the environment that they were designed to be in. We have chickens live outside, our pigs live outside, they all live outside. And by doing that, we're also rebuilding the soil that our farm sits on, because our farm actually sits on property that was previously devastated. And so we're utilizing these kinds of techniques to actually rebuild the environment and add a lot more soil regeneration and fixing of carbon sources into the ground. To me, this also, like moving towards those kinds of operations, is also helps us from a food security perspective. I mean, we have the capacity to eat very well from food that is sourced locally. And so by removing the need to transport food from all over the world, we could be basically supporting businesses locally and also providing ourselves with better quality nutrition. So it's not a huge amount of greenhouse gases that we might be sequestering in this way. I think it's somewhere around 60 megatons, but it would have not just a benefit to the environment, but would also have a benefit to the local economy, and also to ourselves with the better quality of food that we eat.
Okay, thank you so much. So we do have to shift into our two audience questions, and to keep the timing fair with everybody, we have about 2 minutes per per reply. So I think you've seen this question before, but it relates to the green space at Laurentian University and the Wolf Lake Old Growth Red Pine Forest, and basically saying, will you commit to protecting those green spaces? And if so, what actions will you take to do so?
Yes, I will commit to working tirelessly to make sure that we're protecting Wolf Lake, the old growth forest that surrounds it, and also the university green spaces. And I think that one of the ways that we could be doing this work is to prevent it from blocking it, basically from being sold off to commercial developers, making it a protected space. And I think that also what we need to be taking a good hard look at is why it is that these spaces are now on the chopping block, so to speak. And part of that comes from an underfunding of the university in which those lands are, and for Laurentian University green spaces and with Old Lake. So what I would see, in fact, is working to have good funding dedicated to ensure that we can do the work, and ensuring also that these spaces become protected areas, not just in part and parcel, but complete. Because if I understand it correctly, there is exploration right now that is being threatened in these spaces, and that should not be permitted. We can't continue to just devastate the environment for economic growth, because eventually we'll have no place left to go.
Thank you for staying on the 2-minute time limit and
Trying.
events. Yeah, no, that was good. Thanks. We'll go to our next and final audience question here. And so this pertains to small businesses still suffering from the negative effects of the pandemic. And the question pertaining to that is, what would you do to help small businesses thrive in the low carbon economy?
Well, we have several different initiatives that would work here. In particular, one of the things that we're looking, because COVID saw a lot of people that were just put out of work because some businesses have closed, and in some cases permanently. But we also acknowledge that, being able to participate in a low carbon economy actually requires a certain skill set that people may or may not have. So part of our platform includes dedicating some funding to ensure that any student, and not just like the traditional student that we think about, that's somewhere about 18 going into either college or university, but really across the age span, anyone who really wants to be able to reskill or requalify or retrain into those green sector jobs would be able to do so with well-funded public access to education. And so that's one of the ways that we would be doing that. In addition, because we are planning on our projects to stimulate the economy includes investment in infrastructure, but what we want to be doing is also focusing on purchasing Canadian-made products instead of getting things that come from the outside. So again, we'd be reducing the footprint that we'd be using because we would be using local products instead of international. So those are some of the ways that we'd be looking at stimulating economic recovery post COVID-19 pandemic. But the one thing I want to say is that regardless of what we're doing, we can't just do this in a silo. We can't just have heavy-handed approaches. We really need to be consulting with individuals and with the communities that we want to be impactful in to make sure that that whatever the solution we're proposing, it is in fact what people need, what people want, and what makes sense.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our set of questions for you, and you're welcome to stay on the session for the closing remarks. And so before I turn it over to Rebecca to provide her closing remarks, let me just thank all three candidates for participating. Oh, we do have one more slide, pardon me, that we have to go to after this with the fourth candidate. There we go. So for the record, I do want to note that Charles Humphrey was invited to attend this evening, but chose not to attend or provide a statement for the session. So where was I before that? Right, I just want to say thanks to all three candidates for participating this evening on behalf of my colleagues and myself within the 100 debates on the environment, and we wish you good luck. And on that note, I shall turn it over to my colleague Rebecca for her closing remarks this evening.
Yes, thank you so much, Evan, for doing such a fantastic job moderating, and really thank you as well to the candidates for giving us your time this evening. I know it's a very, very busy time. So we're really excited that you were able to come and share these important issues with us in this conversation tonight. We will be sharing the videos of all of the candidates on our Facebook feed in the coming days. We're just going to get them tidied up and ready to go so that we'll be able to post them, and we'll share them with the candidates as well so they can share them with their supporters, and you can share them, the audience members, if you want to share them with friends, colleagues, relations, whoever you think would be interested to hear and we're not able to be with us in person. We'll be sharing those on our social media. Also, just a reminder, please go out and vote. These are your options on election day, September 20th, and then there's advanced polling days that start tomorrow, and it's not too late to vote by mail if that's your preference, and any Elections Canada office can get you to vote before September 14th. So thanks again to everybody for coming, and thanks to Evan, thanks to all the organizers and Citizens Climate Lobby. We'll sign off for tonight, and the leaders debate, you've got 45 minutes to go and live your life before you can sign up for another one.
So if the English language leaders debate is starting at 9 p.m. So if you want a full night of politics, it's on tap tonight. So thanks again.